Chronicles of Primordial War. By Lesyt Cliché. Prologue to Chapter 3. Prologue. Shashwan sat in a remodeled bus and looked at the multitudinous mountains outside the window. Summer solstice had just passed and the mountains were brimming with greens that burst with life. Seeing such a scene after living long in the city made his mood, despondent due to failures, quite brighter. Initially, Shashwan planned to call up a few friends for a journey far away to unwind his heart, but he didn't expect to come across his fellow townmate and classmate who studied archaeology, Cliché, who then pulled him over for an archaeology trip. Now, they were heading towards a relatively remote small mountain village. It was said that things of the Stone Age were discovered there. A batch of people had already set off for that location, and currently, they were in the second batch. Shashwan listened to his classmates start from the primitive human skull, to the stone tools they used, to the murals on rocks. He even took out a few pictures and explained them in detail. The researchers did this and that. After drilling in, it was hard to pull it back out. Although Shashwan didn't understand a thing, he still gave face to him and listened attentively. On the paper were murals that archaeologists had discovered. Shashwan glimpsed at them, and felt they were no better than his nephews and nieces who had yet to even enter kindergarten. The lines on the drawings were rather simple. For most of them, one could tell they were people who held tools for hunting, as well as a few drawings of various species of animals. For the rest, however, he did not have a clue what they were. "This is a drawing of a goat. But this goat drawing is too big," Shashwan said as he pointed at a picture. On the picture, the drawing was a goat with a very long and large curved horn. By its side, there was a person holding a bow and arrows. Yet, the ratio did not seem normal. The head of the person reached only up to the goat's back. A few other pictures were the same, a rabbit's body proportion was akin to a lion, and on the left, there was even a picture of a horse, though its tail was drawn perhaps a bit too short. Of course, not every single drawing's ratio was like that. The different ears mural styles discovered in different provinces were all distinct. At the back, the ratios were drawn a bit more like reality. On the drawings, you could even see a group of people bringing dogs for hunting. He continued flipping back, and found several colored drawings, giving an even clearer look to them. "Oh, this drawing is even more ridiculous. The antler is too large. And this person. The person in the drawing just not only reached the goat's back, yet in this drawing, the person only reaches the height of this deer's leg. What's that in the bottom right corner? An 8-legged alligator." Shashwan could not admire the style of the primitive human's drawing. "They may not have put much emphasis on things like these," Cliché explained. "You mean that when they draw, they did not have any realism in terms of proportion, and instead used exaggerated methods?" Shashwan asked. "It should be like that." Cliché scratched his head. After all, in that time period, humans were not too educated in beauty. The drawings may only represent some sort of symbolic meaning. There was once a researcher who, when studying the murals, hypothesized that the reason why humans back then drew these hunting-related murals on cave walls or boulders was to let the tribes, hunters or warriors, have an idea in their hearts before heading out. Shaman's hut. In Shashwan's mind, an image of a very odd and old swindler appeared. "Ah, why do you have such a face? Let me tell you this. Shamans back then did not necessarily hold low positions in human tribes. Quite oppositely, it's very possible they held high ones." "I know. Swindlers, right." Shashwan nodded. Cliché waved his finger left and right, then took out a folder. In it were some copies of scanned drawings. As he pointed at some of the drawings and characters, Cliché said to Shashwan, "If the appearance of totems is humans' personification of nature and their own collective unity, that means the thoughts of shamans are humans' naturalization. The occupation of shaman has actually already appeared in the Stone Age." Cliché then started to talk about the development of the occupation of shaman from the ancient times to the present ones, without caring about Shashwan. The usage of specialized jargon and even quoting various classics and works, causing Shashwan, who was listening, to have a headache. Shashwan did not have too great of an understanding in that field, nor did he feel interest. If he didn't have an old townmate and classmate who studied archaeology, Shashwan would have simply not bothered knowing anything of those things. Before, when he heard people talk about archaeology, he immediately thought of those priceless antiques. However, the direction of study Cliché took was simply more antique than antiques. It was so ancient that not many people felt interest towards the topic. Several days ago, Shashwan was even listening to the broadcast's discussion on whether Charles Darwin's theory of evolution was correct, or the hypothesis on aliens created life forms was correct. Since he had nothing better to do, Xiao Xuan gave it a listen. After doing so, he put it aside and did not study it any further. On the contrary, Xiao Xuan knew he had interest in ancient human species from a young age. Back then, during middle school, he often had discussions with others regarding several excavated yet disappeared ancient human species remains in recent modern history. You won't understand if I speak professionally, so I'll go simpler. Look, Chi used his finger to point at a map on a certain location. Shaman is mentioned in ancient inscriptions on things such as cow bones, turtle shells, and bronze. But, it's like this. Xiao Xuan looked at the place Chi pointed towards. It was a symbol, looking akin to the interweaving of two work characters. On a few ancient potteries and statues, this double work symbol has appeared. On the topic, shamans also affected areas such as hunting, praying, and rescuing. Looking at it in certain perspectives, shamans can be counted as the scientists of that time. However, all of this is speculation. Even if it's records from ancient times, they may not be true. After all, they love to exaggerate. Isn't there a saying that goes, there is never truth in history? Archaeology is merely digging up a few corners and edges. As for the truth, who knows? The discovered cave this time is also related to shamans. The final few pictures you saw were the murals the first batch of people sent back. In the cave, the double work symbol was also discovered. So, we can speculate that it may be a certain shamaness residential area. Last month, a brief earthquake occurred in that village's region. Most likely, due to that, this cave was exposed. Before the earthquake, not a single person had heard of it. When he spoke up to there, Chi closed the folder and carefully looked at his surroundings. Seeing that the instructor and other students were not paying attention at them, he lowered his voice and secretively said to Xiao Xuan, "I've heard the first person who discovered the cave was a child." Moreover, from a fellow student's news, the child who discovered the cave saw a strange watermelon-sized insect crawling out from his courtyard's wall. Children have great nerves, so the child followed the insect. In the end, it disappeared at the cave. The child went back, notifying adults, and only then was the cave discovered. Watermelon-sized insect. Xiao Xuan felt it to be ridiculous. Regardless of who, when they heard that the first time, they would think it was overly fake. That child lied. Right? Double quotation mark. Chi shook his head. The strange thing is, according to the first batch of people who went there, that there are ancient life-form fossils in the rocks used to construct the courtyard's walls. Chi paused, rubbed the goosebumps on his arm, then continued. There are fossils of ancient organisms in the rock which spawned a watermelon-sized insect, as shown by the child who discovered the cave. However, it was not complete. It was only a portion of the remains. But even so, according to the researchers' theories, if that organism were still living, it could indeed be as big as a watermelon. Moreover, its appearance would also be quite close to the child's descriptions. It sounds incredible. However, was the child the only one who saw it, and others didn't see insects crawling out of their walls? Xiao Xuan was a bit drawn in. Chi shook his head. I don't know. Let's go ask in a while when we get there. We're almost there anyway. When the group of people arrived at their destination, it was already noon, 11 o'clock. Xiao Xuan followed Chi and the others and ate a simple lunch, then returned to the bus. Chi and the others were already impatient. After eating, they did not rest and planned to immediately start working. Chi had already told Xiao Xuan the things he needed to pay heed to, which things couldn't be touched, which places couldn't be gone to, who to find when he needed someone, etc. Xiao Xuan had a plan in his heart. I'll talk to you after work today. Take a stroll by yourself for now. The scenery in this place is quite nice. Green mountains, blue skies and waters. Clean out your lungs after staying in the smoggy city. After speaking, Chi took his tools and followed his instructor. Xiao Xuan was not allowed in that place, but he did not have much interest going there regardless. Only Xiao Xuan was left in the bus. After closing the windows and doors of the bus, it was fairly quiet. In the past few days, Xiao Xuan hadn't gotten good sleep, and on the road, he was listening to Shiki's narrations. Now that it was silent, he was sleepy. When he woke up, it was nearly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Xiao Xuan planned to head out for a walk. Just as he planned to do that, he saw Shichi in work clothes walking over. He went in the bus and grabbed a document. Afterwards, he continued to hurry over and work. However, before leaving the bus, Shichi took out a chicken egg-sized stone and threw it to Xiaoxuan. I picked it up from the cave, and as they weren't paying attention, I grabbed it. It shouldn't be anything important. I cannot give you antiques, but regardless, this stone was still found in the cave. It even looks quite smooth. Someone probably threw it over there, but I'll give it to you as a remembrance. The stone was found near the cave entrance, and was some distance away from the core of the cave. The quality of the stone was also clearly different from the other objects dug out, and there lacked any marks on it. So, the people who came in the first batch focused on the murals and Stone Age's antiques. No one cared about the piece of stone near the cave entrance, and for the sake of amusement, Qiqi smoothly obtained it. After catching the thrown stone, Xiaoxuan looked at it carefully in his hand. The feeling of it was no different from other stones, dark green, chicken egg-shaped, a rather sleek surface, as if it were polished carefully. There was nothing odd at a first glance, and even though it wasn't any antique, it was decent as a small toy, or as an ornament. Xiaoxuan did not mind it. After playing around with it in his hands for a while, he felt that the stone could not be warmed up. After a dozen or so minutes in his hands, it was still quite cool. Thinking about it, Xiaoxuan took out a lighter and used fire to burn the stone. Logically speaking, the places that the flames came in contact to should be slightly scorching. But the reality was after burning, it was still as cool as before. Sweeping his gaze at his surroundings, Xiaoxuan took a fruit knife from the table and laid a piece of paper. He planned to use the knife to scrape off a few bits and take it to the archaeology bus and ask someone to help him examine it. However, after scraping the stone with the knife, not even the faintest of traces were left behind. There was not even a scratch from jabbing it with the tip of the knife. Could not be heated by fire, could not be marked by a knife. It was truly an odd stone. Xiaoxuan walked down the bus with the stone, planning to let Qiqi look at it carefully later. The bus stopped at a fairly close distance from the village. It was just that the road was not too suitable for walking. Some of the villagers in the village had went to work, and those a bit more leisure went to the newly discovered cave for the liveliness. As such, when Xiaoxuan entered the village, he only saw a few people walking around. Around the village was a 2-meter-tall wall made from rock and dirt. It was said to be built several dozens of years ago for protection against wild beasts. The rocks came from the mountain, however, there weren't many large beasts recently, so no one paid any more attention to the stone wall. Glancing at it, he could see the wall's large pieces of rocks. It had a long history, bringing about a feeling of desolation. Xiaoxuan played around with the stone in his hand, his eyes staring at it. Hearing about the discovery of ancient organism fossils in the wall's rocks, Xiaoxuan recalled the watermelon-sized insect Qiqi spoke of. He was just planning to shift his gaze away when suddenly, Xiaoxuan saw a snake-like thing appear on the wall. It was even squirming around. As thick as a small water tank, and its scale-like patterns emitted a cold glint. It was several meters away, but Xiaoxuan felt a chill go down his spine, and all his hair stand on end. It frightened him so much he almost leaped into the air. Yet, when Xiaoxuan blinked and looked back, he discovered absolutely nothing. The rock wall was still a broken rock wall that took many years of beating from the weather. Illusion. Xiaoxuan looked at the other places of the wall. Afterwards, his line of sight fell upon a hole in the wall. There was a large rock over there, left behind after the wall at that area collapsed. The small parts were taken by the villagers back home to build their own walls. The larger ones were left, untouched. And, at that moment, Xiaoxuan saw a green-colored sprout pop up from the rock. The sprout quickly bud leaves and grew tall. At the same time, several vines extended outward towards all directions. The initially 3-meter-tall hole was instantly veiled by the vines and leaves. A fragrance belonging to plants even permeated the air. Xiaoxuan took several steps back, breathing deeply. Focusing his eyes and looking back, he discovered the vines and branches had disappeared. The rock wall was same as usual, but the ground was full of the large smooth stones. Feeling some strange movement in his hand, Xiaoxuan looked down at the stone. The stone that could not be heated up nor could be scratched became sand in a split moment. They slipped through the gaps between Xiaoxuan's fingers. When the final speck of sand fell, Xiaoxuan's vision went pitch black. Chapter 1. The person in front. Your pants are slipping in a cave, lying down everywhere in disorder were 20 children. A layer of thin, ragged hide covered around 7 children. The others who weren't covered by the hide either had their own, or they had to shrink in a ball at the side. But no matter if they were covered or shrunk into a ball, they sleep very soundly. Since it hadn't been cleaned in a long time and there were many people sleeping, there was a very heavy stench lingering about the cave. In their surroundings, there were bore air vents, allowing sunlight to enter, which barely permitted some light in the dark cave. Underneath the air vent, on one side of the cave, a young child clad in torn tide was sleeping there. However, he was different from the others. There was also a large dog that slept by his side, nearly the same size as him. Shashwan opened his eyes. Seeing the sunlight that had already shone to his shoulders, he rubbed his eyes, crawled up, and tidied up the dry grass laid underneath him. Seeing Shashwan's actions, the large dog with initially closed eyes quickly rose and obediently knelt by his side so as to let Shashwan pick up the dry grass it was just on. After bundling the grass together, Shashwan walked out of the cave with one hand holding the bundle of dry grass, and the other holding the dog leash, which was made out of rope. Arriving at such a primitive tribe-like area in such an ineffable manner, becoming a small brat in the tribe located in the desolate wilderness, this body was very weak, as it likely hadn't been able to heal from an illness. Ever since Shashwan woke up from that body, over half a year had passed. Even if he didn't get used to it, he could only grit his teeth and bear with it. Only survival was the most important. Shashwan never would have expected to truly come to a place like that. There were great differences from the primitive tribes of the Stone Age he had learned from before when it was compared to this. Their appearances did not look anything special, but their essence was different. Have you ever seen an ordinary person carrying a small water tank-sized rock with a single hand scrolling around aimlessly on the streets? Have you ever seen an ordinary person jump 3 stories high, without the assistance of any tool, and stand stably after jumping down from a 10-meter tall tree? Shashwan had never seen that in his past life, but in this one, he sees it every day. As for the cave he just came out of, its original name was Lying Down Cow Cave because the appearance of the cave was like a cow that was lying down. It was named by the tribe's shaman back then. However, 1,000 years had since passed. As the years and months replaced one another, the tribe, as it reproduced, built houses outside the cave. As a result, the cave was used as a place for orphans that were taken in by the tribe. Henceforth, it was named as the Children's Cave by the tribe's people. The children who lived inside had no parents to take care of them, nor were there anyone in the tribe who were willing to take them in as their own. So, all in all, the Children's Cave was the tribe's orphanage. After Shashwan arrived at that place, he hadn't seen people from other tribes, which meant in the vicinity of their mountain range, there was only one tribe, their Flaming Horn tribe. In the isolated tribe, it was a life of self-sufficiency. Whilst pulling the dog, Shashwan walked about in leisure. Shortly after, he saw an incongruously sized wooden house. Some of its components were also wood combined with things such as rocks, grass, and dirt. In comparison to the one before, this one, made of wood and rocks, was slightly larger, and it looked also a bit sturdier. That house could be counted as a mansion, located near the foot of the mountain. But no matter if it was the wooden houses or the wooden and rock mansions, in Shashwan's eyes, they were constructions that were horrendously simple. However, after staying there for such a long time, Shashwan did yearn for a wooden house that belonged to himself. But that stage could not be realized. At that time, there were already people starting to move about. The men had already took out their stone tools for grinding so it'd be more convenient the next time they went hunting with already sharpened stone knives. The women too had their own work, sewing hides, drying foods, etc. When Shashwan passed, quite a few people's gazes looked over. Not at Shashwan, but at the organism Shashwan was pulling. In their eyes were drooling and greed as they swallowed their saliva. In their perspective, Shashwan was pulling a huge chunk of meat, enough for them to have several meals. The eyes of those who woke up early to work yet still had an empty stomach turned green. However, after they saw the thing worn around its neck, they, unwillingly, endured their longing to take the wolf away. That was the marking tile of the shaman, meaning it belonged to the shaman. They did not dare to touch it. In their eyes, Shashwan was also merely helping the shaman to look after the wolf. Yes, it was actually a wolf by Shashwan's side. It was born within the mountain ranges, but when it was young, a warrior hunting from the tribe found it. He brought it back so Shashwan could eat it, but coincidentally, the tribe's shaman passed by, left a marking tile that had the marking of a shaman, then departed. Shashwan named the wolf Caesar, the name in which Shashwan named his former life's dog. He raised Caesar like he did a dog, all the way up until the present. The thoughts of the people there were very odd. Clearly, they respected the shaman quite a bit, yet their attitude when facing Shashwan did not change much even after seeing the shaman giving the marking tile to Shashwan. The only thing different was them holding out on their desire to cut Caesar up and eat it. As for the other areas, They did nothing more than what they usually do. After all, the shaman did not tell everyone to help Xiaoxuan. Where would such a grand character such as the shaman have time to pay attention to a child? As time passed, all of them got used to a child that had a wolf. And, ever since Caesar was a wolf cub who didn't even have a complete row of teeth, the shaman hadn't appeared again. But what made the people near the foot of mountain baffled was why did Xiaoxuan call Caesar a dog? And, what was a dog? However, that question did not linger for long because no one paid attention to it. They didn't bother paying attention to it, as they were busy focusing on other things, food. Xiaoxuan was already used to the surrounding gazes. As though nothing were happening, he continued pulling Caesar and walking. Even if the tribe's people were greedy, they would not go and rob the shaman's things. As Shichi had said, shaman's position in tribes was very high. As for why the person residing on the mountains area for influential people, the shaman whose position was the highest, or second highest, in the tribe, would give Xiaoxuan, who slept in the children's cave, a very lowly existence, such an important marking tile. It was due to a term Xiaoxuan mentioned back then, raise. Originally, Xiaoxuan said back then to raise the little wolf cub Caesar before eating it, and coincidentally, the shaman heard those words. He allowed Xiaoxuan to raise it, and in order to prevent the others in the tribe from taking it away, the shaman left a marking tile for Xiaoxuan, which was put over his neck. The shaman had great interest in raising, but in over half a year, the old man hadn't even appeared once. As a result, the impression Xiaoxuan had on the old man was an irresponsible old swindler. Was it easy raising a wolf? Every day, he was being glared at by the people surrounding him. Without a powerful mental ability, he would have already gone insane. In short, raising Caesar was completely because of a coincidence. How difficult was life? Although the tribe took care of the food issue in the children's cave, he was still hungry. Xiaoxuan helplessly sighed. He looked forward, then the corners of his eyes twitched. Before him, on his shoulder, a person was holding a stone club, 2 meters long in the shape of a baseball bat, yet a lot thicker. That was really quite heavy, and according to Xiaoxuan's past life standards, even if he could lift it up it would be very tiring. Yet, that person seemed to hold it as effortlessly as holding an ordinary hoe. With yawns, he languidly walked on the mountain, probably heading to the hunter group in order to discuss the matter of hunting. That is a normal person in this place. As for Xiaoxuan, he belonged in the weak collection of people who hadn't have their power of totem awakened. When he reached around 10 years old, his power of totem would be awakened, and only then would be counted as an ordinary warrior who had the ability to hunt outside. The power of totem was the only level of measure that determined if one were able to become a hunting warrior or not in the tribe. As for what exactly was the power of totem, Xiaoxuan did not know. Perhaps he would understand when the time comes. At that instant, the uncle before Xiaoxuan, who was carrying a stone club with an appearance of sleepiness, had simply not seen the hide he wore as shorts nearly slid down to his knees. In broad daylight, he continued scroll about as though nothing were wrong. There were no reactions from the surrounding people when they saw it either. Xiaoxuan held it in, but ultimately, still said, the uncle who's carrying a club in front, your pants are slipping. Only after Xiaoxuan's third yell did the person in front of him turn around with a yawn. He glanced over Xiaoxuan, his line of sight pausing on Caesar for around half a minute, then looked down at his slid pants. Afterwards, he calmly pulled them up, fastened the belt, and continued walking towards the mountain with the club on his shoulder. Xiaoxuan no longer said anything. In the perspective of the tribe's people, etiquette? Shame? What's that? Can you eat it? If you can't, what the hell is the point of talking about it? Chapter 2. Scribble Hub Chapter 2. Such a plain life. Xiaoxuan's destination was not at the top. He walked towards the back of the mountain along a road scattered with gravel. Right after, he climbed a short distance. Reaching the other side of the mountain, he raised his eyes and looked up. Endless mountains stretching into the distance covered with forests centered into his view, among which a few hills, relatively blank and bare, with few plants. These hills were training grounds for hunting warriors in their tribe as well as the main source of stone they used. Due to the stones, the place was not suitable for plants but was indeed a fine place for training. Xiaoxuan was standing on a gravel yard. The gravel was made out of smashed stones instead of naturally formed ones. All useful stones that could be produced into stoneware had already been picked up by others in the tribe and the rest were just worthless slag, and so no one would usually visit. It was quiet, but still, clangs could be heard from hills nearby. Xiaoxuan himself had never seen a totemic warrior's training, It was said that the destructive force created by totemic warriors was so great that the vulnerable people, like Xiaoxuan at this age, were forbidden to come close. Many have tried to watch the training in silence but were eventually hurt by mistake. Xiaoxuan looked away and loosened the straw leash in his hand. "Now go and eat your noodles." Caesar was already tempted and instantly began to run around the gravel yard. Sniffing around as he ran, he promptly used his forelimbs to dig into the gravel upon smelling something. Before long, he pulled a large worm the length of a foot and the thickness of an adult's thumb out from the digging spot. Caesar swallowed it immediately and went on looking for another one. Those worms were called stone worms by the people of the tribe. They looked like earthworms, yet much larger in size. The one Caesar just ate was a relatively small one, for Xiaoxuan had seen a stone worm as thick as a human's arm. It is said that there were larger ones. However, the larger a stone worm grows, the deeper it would bury itself underground, so there were only small ones left amongst the surface. Stone worms tasted rather bad and many people would suffer from severe diarrhea after eating them, so no one from the tribe would keep stone worms on their menu. This was actually a good news to Caesar, since he had a strong appetite for stone worms. Being a wolf, it's rather sad that he had to stoop to eating worms. Xiaoxuan found a suitable place to air dry the bundle of grass. He tied the grass down, so that it would be more comfortable to sleep on when they got back to the cave at night. After laying the grass down, Xiaoxuan glanced around and made sure that he was the only one there. He came to a short tree at the edge of the gravel yard and began to clear the surface layer of the gravel, digging underground with a roughly built stone knife that was hanging from his waist. Soon, he uncovered an even more roughly built stone container, with a piece of meat jerky in it. Xiaoxuan quickly took out the jerky and buried the container just as it was. The meat jerky was dry and fishy, and only the size of half a hand. Xiaoxuan in his last life would never have taken a second look at it, but now after starvation had settled in, rubber-tasting food became a delicacy. You see, a plain life like that, such as her fate. Xiaoxuan felt vigorous again after eating and stood up to do a few stretches. After that he practiced the fitness boxing he remembered from his last life. Every day, Xiaoxuan would exercise, for the body he awoke and was quite weak. Meanwhile, Caesar was still digging for worms yet with no lower vigilance. He would constantly look up and pay attention to the surroundings. This was the reason why Xiaoxuan dared to take out food in the open, for if he was caught, the food would be taken to satisfy the hunger of others. Xiaoxuan was alone, helpless, sallow and emaciated. He would neither have the spirit nor the courage to walk out of that cave if it weren't for the experiences he had from his last life and the ruthless mind he developed in this one. After practicing fitness boxing for a while, Xiaoxuan stopped to catch his breath, only to notice Caesar suddenly turn his head with half a stone worm still in his mouth. The sudden turn of his head had torn the worm into two parts and the other half quickly burrowed back into the ground. A stone worm could still heal its wound and grow into a complete one after some period of time. The other half in Caesar's mouth was twisting its body, lashing Caesar's mouth. Caesar did not swallow the worm or care about the worm's thrashing. Instead, he stared in one direction growling, indicating that someone was there. Xiaoxuan figured that it should be someone he knew, for Caesar did not bare his teeth. Xiaoxuan also stared towards the direction, and very soon, he heard a soft sound, like wind blowing leaves on the ground. Gradually, a figure appeared in Xiaoxuan's sight. It was a very tall, big man, with fine but simple clothes of hide and fur. On his clothes was a layer of stone chips and on his face, a few scars, giving him a ferocious look. There were also scars visible on the parts of his body not shielded by his clothes. A ring of carefully selected stone tools made of fine stone were hanging on his waist. The stones used to make these tools were different from the gravel under Xiaoxuan's feet. They were harder. These could be made into much more advanced tools for hunting and were of much higher quality than the rough stone knife in Xiaoxuan's hand. If traded for meat, even the smallest tool on that ring would fetch more meat than that which could feed Xiaoxuan for days. Perhaps it was a habit of his from hunting in the woods. The approaching person walked in the same silent way, even when having no intention to hide. Caesar would not have been able to spot him at once and Xiaoxuan would never have heard the slightest sound if he truly wanted to conceal himself. Before Caesar ceased his growling, he immediately tightened his body, revealing 4 long fangs as the approaching man gazed at him for a moment. Not even the remainder of the stone worm's split body falling to the ground from his mouth distracted his attention. To hunting warriors in the tribe, beasts were just prey, food. Naturally, Caesar fell into this category. Although the approaching person only gave him a glance without threat, he exuded a very dangerous aura that frightened Caesar at once because of his hunter's instinct. Given the situation, Xiao Xuan knew he had to speak first. "Good morning, Uncle Mai." The middle-aged strong man withdrew his gaze from Caesar and looked towards Xiao Xuan. The dangerous atmosphere from earlier faded, Xiao Xuan's tension eased. In fact, most warriors in the tribe would not harm children unless provoked. Mai looked at Xiao Xuan and then looked down at the marks on the floor that Xiao Xuan made with his earlier exercises. Glee filled his eyes, but his smile did not soften his face because of the scars. Xiao Xuan knew that Mai was kind and friendly, not as scary as he seemed. Also, Mai and his current body's father were in the same hunting team, so for old time's sake Mai would always help Xiao Xuan. "You came out so early, Xuan? It's good that you want to practice before it's time," said Mai. People in the tribe did not have family names and most people were named with only one word. Perhaps it was more convenient for others to memorize, and Xiao Xuan's body in this life was called Xuan. When in Rome, do as Romans do. Xiao Xuan got used to this gradually. As for the it had an interesting origin. There once was a highly respected ancestor who tended to shout out the word before he called someone's name. This developed into a tradition, passed on through generations, and so people in the tribe today would all call out the word before one's name. Of course, the rule could not be applied to seniors and those who had special positions. Only very few people who lived near the mountain, including children from the orphan cave, would come out to exercise during their youth. Basically their lives revolved around eating and sleeping. Their luxurious entertainment would be playing for a short while. This was because exercising and playing both require exertion of the body, and too much movement would cause hunger to develop quicker. For the poor, the less the consumption the better, so even adults were in favor of this. However, Mai obviously approved Xiao Xuan's action, for it would be more beneficial in the future if he started to practice now. "Are you returning from the training ground, Uncle Mai?" asked Xiao Xuan. "Yes," Mai nodded. No fixed timelines were settled for warriors to train. They could arrange their training as they pleased as long as they did not miss the hunt. It seems that Uncle Mai had good fortune today. By the way, Uncle Mai, I heard from Langa that tomorrow it will be your team's turn to hunt. Good luck with that, and I wish that you will return fully loaded. Langa was in the same hunting team with Mai, and he was the one who brought Caesar to Xiao Xuan. The name Langa meant groundbow in the local language. Langa was a person deserving of this name. Mai smiled at Xiao Xuan's words. He did not say much and prepared to leave, for tomorrow he would go hunting and it might be days before he returned. He needed to rest so that he would be energetic in the morning. Mai stopped after a few steps and turned around. "Xiao Xuan looked at Mai and saw him retrieve a piece of meat jerky from his animal hide bag. Warriors would bring their own food when they trained because there were only stones and rocks on the training ground, so few plants and even fewer animals present that could be considered as food. In order to replenish their fatigued bodies, they would prepare some food ahead of time. The meat jerky Mai held in his hand was prepared early and he had planned to eat this small leftover piece on his way back. Upon unexpectedly meeting Xiao Xuan, he gave it to him without a moment's hesitation. Xiao Xuan was not permitted to go out hunting as it was forbidden for children in the tribe to do so, for their own protection. "Thank you, Uncle Mai," Xiao Xuan said. Food was scarce in the tribe, especially in this season, and not everyone would be so generous as to hand out meat like Mai did. Mai said after he gave Xiao Xuan the meat, "At the hillside where I train myself, sunset can be observed." Mai left after he shared the location of his training ground in detail, and exhorted Xiao Xuan to be extra careful. Caesar relaxed after Mai's figure disappeared into the distance. Looking down, he was very angry to find that the half of the stone worm he had dropped already slipped away. Caesar dug down deep and tried carefully tracking its scent, as if trying to recapture its prey. However, Xiao Xuan was apathetic to this, as he had a chance to quench his appetite for witnessing Mai's training grounds. Xiao Xuan buried the stone container with the meat jerky inside that he got from Mai and laid a layer of stone chips on the top to disguise it. He called for Caesar, looking in the direction that Mai pointed out. "Come, Caesar. Let us do something bold." Chapter 3, Old Rivals. Since this area was the main source of stone for the tribe, surely there would be plenty of fine stones which could be easily made into tools. Naturally, totemic warriors were privileged with the first choice of stones to be gathered, since it was their training ground. Afterward, the weaker people, including Xiao Xuan, would have a chance to pick up the leftovers. The phrase sounded quite demeaning, though it described the situation perfectly. Normally, others in the tribe would pick up the leftovers upon the hours of dinner, when it was almost sunset. This was because only at that time would the majority of the warriors stop training and rest. However, In other times of a day, the training ground would become a rather dangerous place for those who had not awakened their totemic power. The stray stones scattered by the smashing of the totemic warriors' fists against rocks were basically bullets for the vulnerable. Thankfully, with my earlier instructions, it would be much easier and safer for Xiaoxuan to reach the destination. A fine stone could trade for a lot, and Xiaoxuan certainly did not intend to let the opportunity slip away. Together with Caesar, Xiaoxuan traveled the road which I pointed out earlier. While doing so, rumbling sounds came from the training hills, stones being shattered somewhere. From above, in the direction of alternate paths, much larger stones were rolling down the side of the mountain. It would be very risky if Xiaoxuan were to have walked there in the instance that Ma had not informed him of the safe route. Xiaoxuan continued walking as he casually fixed his messy hair and shook off the stone chips caught onto his clothes. The place Ma trained himself was close to the top of the hill. Since this was a totemic warrior's training ground, no gentle path had been excavated and it proved to be difficult to traverse. Xiaoxuan's arms, hands, and feet were bleeding when he finally reached the correct area. The wounds did not concern Xiaoxuan, for they would heal after a few days' rest. It would all be worth it if he managed to find some fine stones. It took a lot of strength to reach this place, and Xiaoxuan definitely would not have been able to climb the mountain if he hadn't eaten breakfast this morning. Stones of different sizes and various shapes were lying on the uneven ground, while on the opposite side of the cliff there were holes of different depths with traces of indentation at the edges of the rock face. Xiaoxuan assumed that there must have been harder stones embedded in the holes he found before Ma dug them out and brought them back with him to make hunting tools out of. Hard and fine stones were not widely distributed in the mountains. In fact, they would be formed into clumps, with some of them on the surface of the mountain and some buried deep inside. Warriors could not tear up the mountain, so finding these fine stones would ultimately depend on their luck. This is why Xiaoxuan earlier made the remark that Ma had good fortune when he returned. Aside from the holes, there were fist and foot marks on the cliff. This was where Ma trained himself. Totemic warriors develop particularly hard fists. Xiaoxuan would break his fist if he struck even the most vulnerable part of the cliff, while the stone would remain intact. The hardest stones with suitable shape were already picked up by Ma. Ma aimed for those which consisted of advanced materials, but there were still some stones of an average quality left which Xiaoxuan could use. Without a second thought, Xiaoxuan made Caesar responsible for surveillance, while he took his time to find stones which could be traded for food. He had to hurry before someone else arrived to rob him of his findings. Xiaoxuan picked up a long shard of stone. It was half a foot in length with an irregular shape and not particularly large or heavy. Xiaoxuan knew that the quality of a stone did not depend on its weight. There were many types of stone present here that Xiaoxuan hadn't seen in his former life. Even employing common sense from his past life would prove to be useless in this world. All the knowledge Xiaoxuan mastered was still new to him. He accumulated this from his experiences over the past 6 months. Unlike the experienced warriors, who could evaluate and grade a stone by its texture and appearance, Xiaoxuan knew nothing of how to identify a stone's quality, for he had no rich experience in this field. So he utilized a primitive method in which he would find a stone of suitable shape to work on and use his stone knife to hack at it to see if it would leave a mark on the stone. Normally, the shallower the engraving, the better the quality of the stone. Xiaoxuan raised his knife high and struck the edge of the stone. After a loud crack, a slight mark was made on the stone. Xiaoxuan was very delighted, for he identified that it could be made into arrow or spearhead. Stoneware armor smiths could decide what to make the stone into. All Xiaoxuan needed to do was to find a good one and trade the stone in for food. After placing the stone into his animal skin bag, riddled with several holes, Xiaoxuan planned to keep looking. However, Caesar detected something abnormal. Xiaoxuan carefully moved towards Caesar and looked in the direction that he was indicating. There were 3 kids, about 10 years old, stronger and taller than Xiaoxuan. Xiaoxuan's old acquaintances as well as old rivals, and they would always rob Xiaoxuan of his belongings. Those 3 little bastards. They were not from the orphan cave, but from families living in the Mountain Foot district. They would usually hang out together and began robbing Xiaoxuan only a few days after Xiaoxuan woke up in this world. At first, Xiaoxuan did not change his mindset and often did things as he did in his last life. He would hold back to some extent even when he fought back. This mercy and kindness resulted in the loss of all his meat jerky that he worked so hard to find, and the scum beat the crap out of him. Afterward, Xiaoxuan understood the reality of the situation and adapted. It was just like the first day when he woke up in the cave and looked out to find children fighting each other for food, with the eyes of wolves. Xiaoxuan then changed his attitude towards them. While recuperating, Xiaoxuan had a profound reflection and after that decided he would no longer hold back when fighting with them. The rule within their tribe was no killing and no disabling. So no one would interfere if no one was killed or disabled. The residents of the Mountain Foot District were already used to this barbaric rule. Xiaoxuan did not know if the tribal people belonged to some kind of special race. They had strong healing abilities even though they looked similar to the people from his former life. A man could stand on his own feet again after a few days' rest even after he was badly injured. After 1 or 2 months, his body would be as good as new. That was also the reason why people in their tribe did not care for fighting, for in their eyes, a fight for reasons such as this was merely a small issue that was far less important than finding food. As for the 3 kids, Xiaoxuan was neither as tall nor as strong as the man, he was not as well nourished as them. What could he use to compete? It requires a ruthless mind and a strong strategy to fight, especially when outnumbered. Xiaoxuan pressed down Caesar's head a little, but Caesar was still showing his teeth fiercely towards the oncoming kids. Xiaoxuan had to squeeze Caesar's mouth and whisper, "Wait a second." Looking around, Xiaoxuan chose a hidden place for the animal skin bag containing the stone he picked up. Then he quietly moved to the backside of the cliff and said to Caesar, "You must deal with Yi, okay? You know who he is, yes?" Some warrior had once said that most beasts living in the deep forests were quite smart, and the stupid ones would be even harder to train. Caesar belonged to the smart kind, and this would not be their first time working together. Even if Caesar got confused, it wouldn't matter who he dealt with, for Xiaoxuan had decided to handle the leading bastard called Sai himself, for it would be a lot easier once he knocked Sai down. Caesar kept his body close to the ground and hid behind a giant boulder. This showed he understood Xiaoxuan's command. It seemed that all wild beasts by nature are capable of stalking with stealth, pouncing fiercely and executing a fatal strike. Their instincts are aroused by hunting, even if one was a wolf brought up as a dog.